Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we've got a wildly fascinating and honestly painfully relatable character study from our source material that examines the absolute lengths the human mind will go to just to avoid an uncomfortable truth. We're looking at the anatomy of a philosophical addict. So, meet Julian. Julian is a 43-year-old philosophy professor who's spent the last 2 decades using literally some of the most complex, high-minded theories in human history for one singular, completely absurd purpose: to justify his 20-year nicotine addiction.
The cigarette I smoke before quitting occupies a unique position in the phenomenology of addiction. Now, picture this. Where do you think Julian is when he's formulating this incredibly profound thought? Well, he's standing on a Brooklyn fire escape in his underwear at 3:47 in the morning, recording what he calls footnotes into his phone. He's freezing, he's hiding from his wife Ellie, and he is completely refusing to admit a very basic fact. He just really wants to smoke. But instead of owning that craving, he dresses the whole thing up in academic armor.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. Weaponizing high theory.
Let's ground this abstract theory in some gritty reality for a second. 20. That is exactly how many years Julian has been trapped in this cycle. We're talking 2 full decades of hiding $13.50 packs of Marlboro Reds right behind the organic quinoa in his kitchen pantry. Now, it all started as this ironic, romantic pose back in grad school, but 20 years later, the irony is completely gone and only the addiction and the endless excuses remain. What's truly fascinating here is how Julian literally warps classic philosophy just to serve his addiction. You know ZENO'S paradox, right? It's the ancient Greek idea that to get from point A to point B, you first have to go halfway and then halfway again infinitely, meaning motion is essentially an illusion. Well, Julian twists this to convince himself that he is constantly in a pre-quitting state. By perpetually cutting the distance to his final cigarette in half in his mind, he creates this alternate reality where he never actually has to arrive at the incredibly difficult act of stopping. It's like a giant mental puzzle he built just to trap himself.
And as you'd expect, this builds into a massive clash of perspectives at home. Julian tells his wife that his failure to quit isn't actually a failure at all. No, to him, it's a controlled experiment, an archaeological excavation of will itself. He frames his addiction as this noble Kantian struggle. But Ellie? Ellie is a highly practical engineer, and she totally strips all that away. To her, he's not Achilles, he's not Zeno, he is just a guy who wants a cigarette.
Julian's defensive lineup isn't made up of self-help gurus, no way. It's Kant, Rousseau, and Descartes. He actively manipulates these specific philosophers during his college lectures to intellectualize his complete lack of control over his own baser impulses. When his body is screaming for nicotine, his brain distracts him with incredibly complex concepts like Cartesian dualism, which is the idea that the mind and the body are totally separate entities. It is an absolutely incredible defense mechanism, perfectly designed to keep his ego totally intact while his lungs deteriorate.
This whole dynamic comes to a head in a pivotal classroom debate with a really sharp student named Madison. Julian asks her, "Is there a difference between doing what you want and being free?" Now, on the surface, they're ostensibly discussing Rousseau's concept of being forced to be free. But really, Julian is just agonizing over his own internal conflict. Is he freely choosing to smoke, or is he entirely submitting to a chemical desire? He is literally using his students to wage his own internal war.
Section 2. The Tyranny of Tomorrow. To really understand this tyranny, we have to look to Aristotle's concept of akrasia. It's essentially the weakness of will, knowing the exact right thing to do, but doing the wrong thing anyway. Julian embodies akrasia in a devastating and frankly deeply ironic way. Picture this. He's given a lecture on the philosophy of the mind, and he physically cannot stop coughing in front of 68 undergraduate students. It is a humiliating bodily rebellion. And yet, despite knowing his health is failing in real time right in front of them, he still desperately craves a cigarette the very second the lecture ends. So how on earth does Julian escape the crushing shame of akrasia? Well, by banking heavily on the illusion of tomorrow. Julian fundamentally believes that tomorrow is a magical threshold where he's just going to suddenly wake up as a stronger, far more disciplined version of himself. And the brilliant, tragic trick of this belief is that because he is definitely going to quit tomorrow, he doesn't actually have to take any difficult action today. Today, he can just smoke.
Section 3. A collision with reality.
The mind can play tricks, but the body absolutely keeps the score. The medical results from his doctor, Dr. Patel, are incredibly stark. Elevated liver enzymes, high C-reactive protein indicating systemic inflammation, and a dangerously high white blood cell count. This isn't a cute thought experiment anymore. This is biology flashing bright red warning signs. Dr. Patel uses these hard metrics to terrify Julian, forcing him to finally realize that absolutely no amount of existential framing can protect him from the very real consequences of smoking a pack and a half a day.
And reality also comes with a very literal price tag, $340. That is the elective cost of a 1-month supply of Chantix, the quit-smoking medication Julian's doctor prescribes him. Of course, Julian's insurance won't cover it. It's an immense financial and emotional toll on them. But his wife, Ellie, just hands over her credit card and pays for it without a single second of hesitation. She is literally trading their savings for the simple hope that her husband might live just a little bit longer.
But as we know, pills aren't enough without a real shift in mindset, which brings us to a pivotal intervention at a local barbershop by Julian's best friend, Marcus. Marcus doesn't hold back. He breaks it down into 3 brutal steps. First, he completely exposes the illusion that Julian's constant delays are somehow responsible or calculated. Second, he reveals the deep-seated fear of failure actually driving the behavior. And third, he demands actual action over endless footnotes. Marcus basically forces Julian to see that he's using philosophy to avoid a terrifying possibility, that he might actually quit smoking. And guess what? He might still be miserable.
And this brilliantly illustrates Marcus's most devastating observation. He looks him dead in the eye and says, "You're hiding in philosophy, because if you actually quit, you might have to change your whole life." Julian isn't just addicted to nicotine here, he is saving a fantasy. He is utterly terrified to face his underlying depression and life dissatisfaction, so he uses the addiction as a perfectly convenient scapegoat.
Section 4. The sickness unto death.
To really understand this massive breakthrough, we, ironically, have to use one last philosopher, Kierkegaard. His concept of despair isn't just about feeling sad, it's a fundamental misalignment between your actual self and your authentic self. A student actually asked Julian to explain this concept in class, and in that moment, Julian realizes he is the perfect walking example of it. He is living in a total state of despair because he knows exactly who he is supposed to be, yet he actively chooses to be someone else entirely. His entire brand has become self-deception. The climax of this story isn't some triumphant, victorious moment. It's actually a quiet, brutal surrender. Julian finally takes out his phone and deletes every single voice memo. He deletes all the footnotes. He strips away every last piece of that philosophical armor. And because he does that, he is forced to wake up at 4:17 a.m. and just face the raw, terrifying agony of withdrawal with absolutely nothing to protect him. He just has to sit there, shaking in the dark, feeling the actual consequences of his actions for the very first time in 20 years.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer, and I want to turn this directly over to you. What footnotes do you use to justify the gap between your actual and authentic self? Julian used Kant and Descartes to hide his addiction, but let's be honest, we all use our own complex excuses to avoid confronting our messy realities. Are you endlessly preparing for a tomorrow that never actually comes? Take a hard look at the stories you tell yourself today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.